Good evening, everyone. My name is Fritz Schroeder, and on behalf of the Lancaster Conservancy, welcome to Nature Hour. Lancaster Conservancy's mission is to provide wild and forested lands and clean waterways for our community forever. For 50 years, our organization has sought out natural places that are so precious and beautiful that they must be protected. Our stewardship team works to restore these special places by creating trails and planting trees. These preserves are then open for you and I to use to hike, hunt, fish, and birdwatch 365 days per year. Places like Shanks Ferry, House Rock, Kelly's Run, Otter Creek, Climbers Run, Welsh Mountain, and many others are protected forever, thanks to an incredible group of volunteers and supporters. We launched Nature Hour this past summer with the goal of bringing an assortment of local and regional experts directly to your home with presentations that help you better understand both the Conservancy's work and the work of our community partners. The format of tonight's lecture is a 45-minute presentation followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will do our best to have them answered at the end of the presentation. In addition to tonight's lecture, we have one additional Nature Hour this fall. On Wednesday, October 28th, we welcome Lancaster Conservancy's very own Senior Vice President of Land Protection and Kate Gonick, who will be presenting a lecture titled Saving History Through Land Protection. You can learn more about and pre-register for the lecture on our website at lancasterconservancy.org under upcoming events. And we are just beginning to start planning for Nature Hours in 2021 as well. The Conservancy is blessed with incredible corporate support, and tonight we want to recognize Turkey Hill Dairy, who is our presenting sponsor of Lancaster Water Week, and Clark Associates, who is our lead annual sponsor. Thank you, Turkey Hill Dairy and Clark Associates, for your incredible support. And now I would like to introduce our presenter, Ryan Davis, the reason that we're all here, to learn about trees. Ryan Davis manages the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay's Forests program out of the PA office here in Lancaster. He holds a BS in Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology and a minor in Forestry from North Carolina State University, along with an MS in Wildlife and Fisheries Biology from West Virginia University. He spent the first half of his career in the field, traveling the country to chase critters, and the latter half creating habitat in Pennsylvania. Ryan now specializes in education and outreach on stewardship, helping landowners meet their habitat management goals on working lands and reforestation of agricultural and developed land. We're very blessed to have Ryan here in our community doing this great work. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Fritz. Appreciate it. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Classic. Okay. There we go. Look good? Can I get a thumbs up, Kelly? Okay, excellent. All right, yeah. Well, thanks for the really lovely introduction and for having me. I'm flattered that so many people want to learn about how to identify trees. That's fantastic. So yeah, I do tree identification presentations a lot. Usually, how they work is we do actually just like this, a little bit of kind of a 101. Usually with a PowerPoint, often inside, and then we'll go outside, take books, learn what we've sort of covered in the classroom, practice as a group. My philosophy is sort of a teach a man to fish philosophy rather than give a man a fish, instead of saying, okay, this is a white oak, here's how you identify it. That's important too, but I'm not always going to be there with you when you're out in the woods and you don't know what a tree is. So I want to teach you how to go about that process of learning what this particular tree in front of you is. So you might not know, you might not really at the end of this session, be able to rattle off a bunch of trees you can identify, but hopefully we'll equip you with the tools to be able to do it no matter what you're looking at in the future. Okay, so before we get into the meat and potatoes here of tree identification, a little bit about the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. So we're an environmental nonprofit. We cover the entire Bay watershed. We have our Pennsylvania office here in lovely Lancaster City. And we're obviously very focused on restoring the Chesapeake Bay itself, but that involves restoring the entire watershed, not only the landscape, but also the communities therein. So we focus holistically on doing all of that work across that very large area. We have 4 general areas, program areas that we focus on. And as Fritz said, I'm our Pennsylvania Forest Program Manager. So we also have agriculture team, green infrastructure, and stewardship and engagement. All of those teams are very robust here in our PA office. So if you're interested in those areas, feel free to look us up. So on the forest team, what do I do? What is a forest program manager? So our goals are pretty simple: to increase the quantity of forest cover in the Bay watershed, and to increase quality of forest cover in the Bay watershed, and to increase the stewardship for forest cover in the Bay watershed. Quantity we address by reforestation. That's pretty simple. We need more forest cover, so we plant more trees. Quality can be a little bit more complicated. We do a lot of forest management programs where we're helping private landowners to manage their woods a little bit better, so that they're less invaded, so that their long-term sustainable goals are achievable, and things like that. And then for stewardship, this is exactly what we're doing right now. All of y'all are already interested in, identifying trees at least. So presumably you're interested in forests and trees, but it's about basically promoting forests as something that everyone should hold as valuable, because the more people hold them as valuable, the better stewardship we'll have, and hopefully the more forest cover we'll get as well. I always have this slide before I forget now, because I would have forgot this. If you're interested in following up with us after this, you can subscribe to our newsletter if you're a newsletter kind of person. So both of these are monthly. On the left there is our Forests for the Bay, which is our forest education outreach program. So if you go forestforthebay.org, and then there's that right circled in red where you can sign up for our newsletter that comes out once a month. We have original articles written by myself and my teammates. I also produce a video on tree identification once a month, and we have that in there. And we also have a lot of headlines from forests around the country, but especially around the watershed, and then a lot of events in the watershed too. So if you're interested really specifically in forests, that's an excellent resource for you. At least I think so. I am quite biased, but and then on the right there, if you just go to allianceforthebay.org, that will pop up there to sign up for our newsletter. So if your interests are more so, or maybe both, you want to sign up for both, but if you'd like to learn more about the Bay itself, what we're doing around the watershed, that kind of stuff, which often does tie into the forest work, but less focus on the woods, then that could be a great resource for you too, once a month. And I would have forgotten this as well. So the Tree Talk name of this nature hour comes from, I do a little kind of YouTube series for the Alliance. So if you look up Forests for the Bay on YouTube, you'll find it. And so we call them Tree Talk. We have a couple other things on there too, but Tree Talk is kind of the main thing that we do on our YouTube channel. And that's just my wife and dog and I, when we go hiking, once a month, I stop by a tree or a shrub or whatever that I think would be seasonally interesting to talk about, and just give a little kind of how to identify it, natural history, uses, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully you'll find that as another good resource here to continue your learning. Okay, so now let's get into it. So again, I think everybody here already is on our team. I'm preaching to the choir here. Everybody already wants to know what all these species are. But I like to start with this to kind of remind people how critical it is to know what we're looking at when we're looking in the woods. I like to say, well, people say forests are a 100-year garden, but really it's more like a 300 to 500 to, I don't know, thousands of years of a garden. Every little thing that we do in the woods, whether we're removing a plant, adding a plant, or doing nothing at all, that is all going to affect that forested area, that forest stand, for years and years, centuries potentially to come. So it's really important that if we're going to take any actions, and again, not doing anything is an action, we should know what we're doing. We should be a little bit educated about that. And so here are 3 examples of trees that from a distance look very similar, and even maybe from these photos look very similar. I'll start there on the bottom. So that's black walnut, Juglans nigra. I have been in many situations where landowners will try to make a management decision about, all three of these species, one of these species, and accidentally kill the wrong one or leave the wrong one. So, down there is black walnut. The right side is staghorn sumac, and the left side is ailanthus, tree of heaven, ailanthus altissima. So these are three species that are very important to know. Black walnut is perennially one of the top most marketable timber species. It produces the most income, I guess you could say, from harvesting a walnut log, because they're very, very useful for a lot of applications. But some people don't like them for a variety of reasons. If, say, you want to have a veggie garden right underneath a walnut tree, that might not be the best of idea. They produce a chemical that can inhibit the germination or survival of a bunch of species. So, you should know what that is. If it's a walnut, you should know if it'll meet your objectives to keep it, if it'll meet your objectives to enhance it, or if it'll meet your objectives to remove it. And then on the right there, staghorn sumac. A lot of people assume that it's invasive because it's kind of weedy. Basically, it's just really tough. It'll grow anywhere that's kind of drier, but you'll see it growing, through gravel and stuff like that, and it'll spread clonally by the roots. So it'll form these little thickets, and so people assume it's invasive, but it's native, and it's really, really good for pollinators. So if you're a beekeeper, you should not be cutting down your staghorn sumac. You should be leaving it for your bees. Now, this little devil on the left here, our tree of heaven, is another story entirely. You should not leave it to see if it grows into a walnut tree. It needs to be killed as soon as possible, or else it will just keep spreading. It's also the host plant for the now infamous spotted lanternfly. It's believed that the lanternfly needs to feed on ailanthus at some point in its life cycle to reproduce, or at least to reproduce very effectively. So it's important for everybody, definitely in PA, but really across the US, to be very focused on removing ailanthus as soon as they can be. So again, an example of, from a distance, let's say we're 50 feet away, and you don't want to go up and smell leaves and look at things under a guide. There are things, if you know your tree ID pretty well, you can look at differences from a distance and say, oh boy, there's some tree of heaven over there, I need to treat that. Or, oh, nice little sumac growth. Now, as you're potentially beginning your tree identification journey here, I just want to say, nobody's perfect, don't worry. You'll probably get some things wrong over the way, and I wanted to include this when I was making that slide years ago. I made that slide, that last slide, and plantsamerica.com or whatever had this profile of staghorn sumac, Rus typhina. You can see there with the red circle, Rus typhina. And you look at these pictures, this is tree of heaven, this is not staghorn sumac. So, don't worry, nobody's perfect. You'll get stuff wrong. I get stuff wrong all the time. Just over time, the better you get, the less stuff you'll get wrong, and the quicker you'll realize you got something wrong. But then the second lesson from this is don't trust Google for tree identification. Oftentimes I've noticed, I think what's happening sometimes is you just look at those sort of thumbnails on Google Images. If you type in, say, black walnut, what they might have as a thumbnail is tree of heaven, and in the actual article, were you to follow that link, it would say somewhere, this is not walnut, this is tree of heaven, but it's just putting it in there. So be careful when you're Googling, when you're trying to confirm what your species ID is. But here's where it's really at. I'm kind of a bark guy. I love identifying things by bark alone. I love teaching people how to identify things by bark alone, because it's very intimidating, but it's really the same exact process as learning leaves. You'll just potentially need a different identification book, but I really encourage you to learn your bark. We have maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months, depending on where you are and what species are around you, still having leaves on. Then for another 6 months or so, 4 months, we might not have anything. So unless you're not going to care about what species are for a good third to half of the year, then you need to learn your bark. And additionally, there's a lot of other reasons why it's important to learn your bark. Let's say the tree is 200 feet tall, 150 feet tall. It's a little bit more reasonable, but and the leaves are way up there, and you don't have binoculars. If you are able to identify it, on the ground from the bark, then you'll be ahead of the curve. But these are those three species. This is staghorn sumac, black walnut, and Rus typhina, or sorry, I already said Staghorn sumac, Ailanthus altissima. So Ailanthus is there on the left with those kind of streaks. Black walnut is right in the middle, and then on the right is Staghorn sumac. So let's say you know, those leaves look very, very similar, right? But well, maybe some of you might be thinking, well, the bark looks very similar too, but to me, this bark is very, very distinctive. And part of kind of understanding what's distinctive about it is getting to know it, really kind of taking a look at it, studying it, and trying to practice as much as you can. Okay, so before we jump in, one more thing. Before we jump in, I just want to kind of tell an anecdote to kind of explain this first point here of really paying attention to detail, really focusing on everything. This is a true story. My wife was born in a Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. My father-in-law was driving my mother-in-law to the hospital, and it was really late night, and in early May in Wyoming County, Pennsylvania. And she wasn't going to make it, so they had to just pull over, actually in a lumber yard. That was the only place where there was lights. And she had the baby there in the Cutlass, and a coupe also, which is crazy. In the backseat of a coupe is where my wife was born. The last time we were hanging out with my in-laws, this story came up, and my father-in-law could not remember whether it was a 1980 Cutlass Supreme or a 1979 Cutlass Supreme. And to me, there are the two cars. On the left is 79, on the right is 80. They look identical to me. I'm not a car guy. I don't know. They look like old cars. I don't know if I would have even known it was a Cutlass, or if it didn't have the logo on it in Oldsmobile at all. But he remembered that it had two headlights. It didn't have, you can see on the right there, the 1980 Cutlass has 4 headlights. It has 2 lights on each side. He remembered that the one that my wife was born in did not have that. It just had the 2 normal headlights. So we deduced that it was the 1979 Oldsmobile Cutlass is what my wife was born in. So again, this is a silly story, but it goes to show you we need to focus on everything if you are to identify some species. There are some species that are super easy to identify no matter what. You know, I saw one person said their favorite tree is a tulip poplar, which is one of my favorites too, but that is super, super easy to identify. Probably my favorite tree is American sycamore. That's another one that very easy to identify, but there are some that it's really hard to know the difference between different species. So we have to really focus on those minute details. And then additionally, I guess another, you know, as you're beginning your journey here to know how to identify trees a little bit better, kind of take solace in that, you know, we're all like, I wouldn't expect any of you to be able to know that's a Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme or which one is which year. But if you're a car guy like my father-in-law and spent your entire life, you know, working with them and on them, then you probably would know the difference. He can spot them from, you know, a mile away, literally. And so, you know, I can spot the bark of a walnut from hundreds of yards away, and you might not be able to yet, but over time, with a lot of practice, you'll get there too. So now we'll finally get into it. So the first sort of general tip I have in kind of learning how to identify trees is to pay attention to everything you can. So here's an example. I get this question all the time of what is this? Just you know, a text or an email or whatever, and it's just a picture of a leaf. What is this? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what that is. There's not enough details. There's 400 tree species in the eastern U.S. That could be a lot of different things, especially, you know, that's not an incredibly distinctive leaf. So a little bit more detail here. So let's say, you know, I get this in an email, for example, they found it in a super wet area on the edge of a pond. Okay, that helps a lot. Habitat is really, really important. And let's say we know they're, you know, in Lancaster, PA. That also really narrows things down. That's great. It's about 7 feet tall. Okay, that's, you know, also potentially helpful. It could just be a small tree. It could be a shrub. You know, who knows? But again, that can be helpful. It's June and it had white flowers. That's great. That is very helpful. That really does narrow things down. And they've seen it with small red fruit in the fall and in the winter. So that's a lot of clues. But I don't know. I don't know what that is. That could be a bunch of different things. There are a bunch of things that have similar looking leaves, similar traits. That's still not enough information. How about this photo here? Yes, I do know what that is. Well, I was tempted. I almost said, okay, show of hands, who knows what this is? You know, you could do it at home by yourself. So this is winterberry, Ilex verticillata. Here's some additional details that we're getting a little bit from the photo, but the flowers are held in that crook of the leaf and the stem, which is called the axil. Is the AXIL is the technical term for that. The stem we can see is that greenish brown color. There are those little oval lenticels. Lenticels are gas exchange pores. Now that you've heard that word and know that they're a thing, look at every single stem that you look at, and you'll probably see lenticels on them to aid in gas exchange. There's no thorns or spurs to be seen on the whole shrub, presumably. So now we have enough information. There we go. That's the Will Smith we want to see. We have winterberry holly, Ilex verticillata. So again, we have to pay attention to everything, as much detail as we possibly can before we're able to really make a conclusion. Another great way to go about identifying trees is using the process of elimination. So here we have a specimen. What is this tree? Well, this one's a lot easier because we have more information. We can see that this has compound leaves, and we'll get into what that means in a little bit. It also has opposite leaves. We'll get into what that means in a little bit too. But generally, compound leaves means all of these 5 little things that you might have thought was a leaf, that is actually a leaflet. That entire structure that has 5 and the stem, that is the leaf of this specimen. And again, we'll get into how to tell if you have a compound or a simple leaf in a little bit. And then opposite, what does that mean? Well, the branches or the leaves are held opposite of each other. And we'll get into what that means too. So again, using the process of elimination, say you listen in here, you practice yourself, you kind of start to gain a little bit of knowledge and some aptitude in identifying trees. You might know, well, there's not a lot of stuff out there that's both compound and opposite. We can eliminate a vast majority of those 400 species. There's really only, probably less than 10 species that it could be. And so, here are 2 options. It could be a box elder, or it could be an ash species. So what you can do is then, another tip I have is don't be afraid to guess and check. Again, you be careful with Google. Be very, very careful with Google, especially if it's a less specific search. I really recommend searching by scientific name if you possibly can. If you can figure out, okay, I think this might be box elder, look up the scientific name of box elder and then type that into Google. You'll get better results. I'm not really certain why, but that's what I've noticed. And so then you can check, and if most of these pictures are all lining up with what you're seeing, then quite likely that you then have a box elder. So there we go. Acer Negunda. And then, so, okay, let's say you identified this box elder using an ID, key, and your existing knowledge and Google, all these things together, and being very, very perceptive, of course. It's a box elder. While you're out, look for more box elders. This is the practice part of it. I've been doing this for over a decade now. And so I have a lot of practice professionally identifying trees and shrubs and all manner of other plants. And so basically, you could do that on your own. You don't have to be doing it for work. If you do it every time you're out, or I don't know how safe this is, but this is certainly what I do. I look at trees while I'm driving all the time. That's, I don't really know what I did before. I used to look at trees while I drove. It keeps me engaged and keeps me going. But just look for more. Look for more box elders. Or let's say again, tulip poplar. You identified a tulip poplar. Look for tulip poplars everywhere you are. Try to find tulip poplars. Study them. Look at not just the leaves that you now know how to identify, but look at the bark. Look at the buds. Look at their fruit. Look at where they're usually growing. Look at where you've never seen them before. Geographically. Let's say you travel, up north and suddenly you're not seeing a species anymore, or you are suddenly seeing a lot more of the species. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to as much as you possibly can. And then just keep looking for more and keep studying that individual and studying as many of that species as you possibly can. And then that kind of last point there, this is, I think, what kind of really takes someone sort of to the next level of being a naturalist. Is paying attention to phenology. So sort of the time of year, the annual cycle for a given individual and a given species is a great way to just get to know that species. So again, if it's box elder, just try to go back to that place where you found that box elder, where you're 100% confident that that is your box elder, and go back there over the whole year, different seasons. Take a look at it then. What's it look like in spring? What's it look like in fall? When does it break bud? When does it leaf out? When does it start blooming? When do the fruit start developing? Things like that. The more kind of familiarity you can gain with a species, the easier it will be to identify in the future, for sure. And now this is the part that we usually get a lot of practice in the field with. I put something together here that I'm hoping will work, where basically we're going to run through an identification key, a dichotomous identification key, sort of together, but not, in the field. But I really recommend both of these books are great. I've got both of them here in my home office. I have several copies of both of them, for events and stuff. But we don't get kickbacks or anything from these resources, but these are two of my favorite. Both of them have keys in them, which is very, very helpful. And the Eastern trees is nice because it's almost pocket sized, maybe like a really big vest pocket or something like that. It would fit in. But I highly recommend investing in a guide. And so the Eastern trees is better when you do have leaves to look at. Bark is good for any time of year, but it is a little bit less than pocket size. It's a little bit more, or a little bit bigger than pocket sized, a little bit more expensive, and it's actually fine-tuned for the northeastern U.S., more kind of New England. But we're sort of on the edge where most of our species that we find here are in the book, and there's not a lot of species here that are not in the book. And I believe he is working on one for more of the mid-Atlantic area that we're in. So I'm really excited when that comes out. So the first step to using a key is to read the introduction. That sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but it also sounds way too boring for anyone to want to do. Let's say you're really, really excited. You want to get out. You want to start identifying trees. You buy this book or you rent it from the library or whatever. The last thing you're going to want to do is sit down and read the first 10 pages. But I really recommend it because it's not just all this kind of stuff of kind of taxonomy and jargon and terms and definitions. It's how to use the book itself as well, because every guide, every key is different. And so if you can learn, all you have to do is spend 10 minutes reading that front material, and then you will be able to go out with that tool, if it's a good tool, and identify anything that's in that tool. So I think it's a worthy investment of 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And I say that having not done that for years and years and years, until I started giving these, how to identify tree workshops. I never really did that either, but it is incredibly helpful. It will completely change how you're able to use IDs in the future, ID guides rather. Okay, so in that front matter, there will be some terminology. I want to run through some of that real quick because it'll help us with our examples, and it'll help you when it's time for you to start using a key, whether it's this one or any key. These are really important terms and things to look for too with trees. So we already talked about this a little bit of that opposite or alternate. What we're talking about is the branching pattern. So this applies not only to leaf tissue, but to branch tissue. You can see there on the left, we have an alternate branching pattern. In the middle, opposite, on the right, whorled. So what I suggest that anyone does is look for the bud. So I wish I could do like a pointer with my mouse, but I'll just hope you're following along. So look on the American beech there, and the buds are those kind of long, skinny little protrusions. You'll see wherever there's a bud, there is a leaf. And that is the case with any tree species. There's going to be a bud associated with every single leaf. So if you look for the buds, that's where you can look for where the leaves are going to be and what we call the node of growth, which is the area where leaf tissue is going to come out and where new stems are going to come out. Actually, out of that, those buds are going to turn into new stems. So we'll look for the bud. We can see there on the left that alternate pattern, branching or leafing pattern. We can see for every bud, for every node, we only have one leaf. In the middle there, that opposite branching pattern, again, clearly they're opposite of each other, but you can count. Wherever there's a bud, there's going to be 2 leaves coming out of that node of growth. And then on the right there, world, we really only have one species that's going to show up here that's a tree in PA, and that's our northern catalpa. So you don't really have to worry about world too much, and catalpa can be opposite actually. But if you have more than 2, we call that world in that node of growth. And again, just look for the buds. Even if you don't have leaves, if it's the middle of winter, knowing this arrangement is incredibly important because of that process of elimination. If you can tell that it's one of these species that has the opposite branching pattern, then you have a much shorter list of species that you can pull from to figure out the identification. And so again, look for the bud. We can see the buds in there. This is an ash stem, and we have 2 nodes, 2 bud scars per node of growth. Okay, so these are the species that do have opposite branching or leaf arrangement patterns. There's been a mnemonic that has evolved over time. Scientists have a pesky habit of changing taxonomies, changing as we learn more, as we get more genetic analyses, as we kind of do more studies, we figure, oh, this species actually isn't in this group anymore. Let's move it over here. And that's nice, but it really messes up really cute little acronyms that we used to have with the species. So now to try to remember your opposite species, the saying would be mad ad old butt cap. So mad is for maples, ashes, dogwoods. Ad is for Adoxaceae, the family Adoxaceae, which contains all of our viburnums, a lovely native shrub genus, and our elderberries. Oleaceae is the olive family. That's for privets. We do have another tree in the olive family in the east, but I think it's more of a southern species. So we don't have to worry about that here. Buck is for buckeyes, which do have opposite branching patterns, but you're not going to find a ton of those here in PA. I don't know if I found a single one in the woods. And then Caprifoliaceae is the honeysuckle family. So mad ad big old butt cap is how you remember that. I hope everybody's writing that down, ready to get your mad ad old butt cap tattoo. But it's a lot to remember, so just be mad. Just all you really have to remember is that maples, ashes, dogwoods, and then remember in the back of your head, there's a bunch of shrubs that are opposite as well. So that would be our viburnums, our elderberry, our privet, our honeysuckles, all those shrubs. But for trees, it's really just going to be maples, ashes, dogwoods, and then those other couple ones. So again, let's look for the bud, but this time not for leaf arrangement, opposite versus alternate, but for whether a leaf is compound or simple. So on the left, we have a hickory. We'll look for the bud, and we have all of those leaflets, all of those things that look like leaves, as long, slender, serrated little leaves are actually leaflets, because look at the base of those leaflets. There isn't a bud there at all. There is a bud at the base of the stem and what we call the rachis or the petiole of the leaf, the stem of the leaf, basically. That's where we have that bud, that little kind of sulfury yellow bud. So that is one leaf there. That's how we know that that's a compound leaf. On the right, we have again our lovely American beech, such a photogenic leaf with those very parallel veins. But you can see the bud and then the leaf. No leaflets, just one leaf, so we call that simple. It's a simple leaf structure, and then compound when we have multiple leaflets per leaf. Some additional terms that'll be really helpful. Some of the guides kind of take a little bit of the terminology, the jargon out of it. We would call this palmate lobes, where it's kind of like, imagine the palm of your hand, where the lobes kind of array from a single point. So maple is a fantastic example of that, or you could call that fan lobed, and then feather lobed would be the other type of lobe structure. We would call that pinnate in more of a technical terms. Pinnate meaning feather. So you can see this white oak leaf. We have structures coming out to the side, sort of like a feather. They don't array from a single point. They are all coming off of the main vein, essentially. We call that the midrib of the leaf. So that would be feather lobe. Another important thing to kind of look for as you're trying to identify a tree. Now, not just the lobes, but those veins. Let's look at the veins within each of these leaves. So on the left are maple. We have palmate venation as well as lobes. So again, we're starting from one point, and you can really see this with the maple. It starts one point, and then they all go out from there. The main veins do anyway. And then on the right, the veins all array from the central vein, that midrib. We call that pinnate venation or feather veined. And then I think this is the last one. We look at the margin of the leaf very frequently, and it's basically the edge of the leaf. So there are a bunch of different ways this could look. Probably the most common, I would say, is these terms crenate, which means scalloped, basically, kind of like a seashell. And then crenulate means scalloped but smaller, like basically extra tiny versions of that. So you'll see that ulate suffix on dentate as well. Dentate meaning toothed, and then denticulate would be tiny little teeth. Same with serrate, so serrated edge versus cerulate edge, and so on. So another important thing to look for is that the margin of the leaf. Okay, so let's practice. If you do have Peterson's Guide to Eastern Trees, this is your opportunity to open it up and work along. If you don't, it's all good. I built this, assuming that no one would have it handy, and so we'll run through it together. So we'll practice with our box elder, and this is kind of a nice way to do it because we'll ease in. We already know it's a box elder, and we'll just kind of look for it in the key. So what I would have done 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is said, okay, I have this leaf. I'm gonna just kind of look. No, I don't see it in here. ID books are hard. They're not any good. But if we look here in the very one of the first pages, we have the key. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask these questions and see if it's yes or no. If it's yes, we'll look further in that section. If it's no, we'll move on to the next section. So question number 1, does our specimen there have needle-like or scale-like leaves, mostly evergreen? So that's referring to conifers. This is not a conifer over here on the left. It's not a pine or a hemlock or anything like that. It's a broadleaf tree. So the answer is no. So we'll go down to the next category. Is our specimen a broadleaf tree with opposite compound leaves? So remember, we cheated a little bit. We started with this specimen. We do have compound leaves, and they are opposite. So yeah, that's the category. We don't even have to go further. That's excellent. So now let's look at the first option there in the book. Trees with opposite. So okay, we're still good. Fan compound leaves, buckeyes. Now, remember the feather lobed versus fan lobed, very similar here with these compound leaves. This is a feather compound because the main stem, everything is coming off of the main stem rather than everything coming from a central point. So here's our buckeye, an example of a fan compound leaf. So that is not what we have. So what we'll do is then we'll flip to the next page and keep going down the line. So next option, small trees with opposite compound leaves. Let's say that we're in the woods. This is a large tree, so we can rule that out immediately. If it's 25 feet tall, has a big crown, it's clearly a tree, not a shrub or a small tree. Then we can go ahead and say, all right, what's the next option? So what is the next option? Trees with opposite feather compound leaves. Oh, that's us. That could be it. So let's check it out. So there it would be page 194 for the accounts, but plate 8. So we're going to start with that plate before we go into more detail with the species accounts. So you'll open it up to that plate. Here we have on the left a chart that has some distinguishing traits to help you figure out what you have. And there on the right are generalized drawings. Based on this plate, remember, here's our specimen. We have 5 leaflets here. It's kind of a weird picture. That last one is sort of split. It's kind of torn right down the middle. We have 5 leaflets here. There's only one of these ash species that could have 5 leaflets, and that's white ash. But we can look at the photo, and again, it's very generalized, and they're not really meant to look exactly like a species would. out in the woods, they're supposed to look like a general version of it. But we can even see that that's not really, doesn't seem right. We can look again. Let's look at everything. Let's look at the details. These stems are very clearly whitish in color, purplish, greenish, whitish kind of color. They're not a darker brown like the white ash. Additionally, we have some lobes on some of these leaflets, and the white ash doesn't have any lobes on their leaflets at all. So let's go back to the front section and keep going down our key. So what's our next option is another with a bunch of ashes on it, and ash leaf maple. Interesting. I don't know. Let's go check it out. So again, plate 9, or if you wanted to go to the accounts, they would start at page 196, but I recommend going to the plate first. So we'll go to the plate and let's see. Oh goodness, wow. Do we have a match? Yes, we do. But first, before we get too excited, and we can see there, that ash leaf maple, we have some lobes, we have 5 leaflets. You can even see the stem is kind of a greenish color. But let's double check first. Let's go to the species accounts, flip into page 197. I am going the wrong way. And check it out. So here's our ash leaf maple. We can see here moist, fertile soils. That happens to be where we found this specimen. Hairless, green or purplish, glossy, frequently white powdered twigs. Leaflets 3 to 5 with coarse teeth or none. End leaflets often 3-pointed and somewhat lobed. Oh, that's great. And then we can look at the range here. We can continue to read the account, and oh my goodness, everything is lining up. If you have Google, if you have reception, you could Google it or look it up on any other, search engine or app or whatever that you have for plants just to confirm. But oh my goodness, that's it. Box elder, Acer negunda. Okay, so that was an easy one. And again, kind of a cheat because we already knew, what that was. So I want to choose one that's going to be a lot harder to identify because let's look at, that was a very distinctive leaf, that box elder leaf, right? That looks weird. Honestly, it looks a lot like poison ivy when you're in the woods and you just see a little flash of it. But here's a little tidbit that might save you a lot of trouble. Poison ivy is alternate branching pattern. It does have the leaflets of 3 that can look very similar to box elder, but box elder is, remember, opposite, whereas poison ivy is alternate. So see something in the woods and it's opposite and it looks like poison ivy, it's not poison ivy. It's almost certainly box elder. Okay, so we'll try with this hard one that the leaf, I don't know, it just kind of looks like a leaf, right? But again, let's pay attention to everything. Let's focus for a second. So you can see in the background of this photo, the other trees are fully green, kind of looks like summer. These ones are already a very deep reddish, purplish, or pinkish rather color. So that's kind of interesting. We'll kind of keep that in the back of our minds. It's a simple leaf. You can see it's not compound. We can also see that it is alternate, not opposite. And if you're having a hard time at the tips of the stems, you can look further down the stem, closer to the trunk, and you can see that branches do not come out opposite of each other. They come out alternate of each other. So we have simple leaf, alternate branching pattern. We also have a smooth margin. There's no, serrations or dentations or anything like that. I would say the shape is roughly ovate, meaning egg-shaped. And some of them have that little kind of tip at the end of the leaf. So we've just gathered a lot of data now. We've taken it in just looking at the leaves too, and the bark is something else entirely. But let's say we're looking up at these leaves and going to try to now use our key to identify it. So let's jump right in. It's not a conifer. No, so we don't have to worry about that. Is it a broadleaf tree with opposite compound leaves? It doesn't have opposite leaves or compound leaves. So no, we can roll that out, flip to the next page. So now we're going to start there at number 3. Is it opposite and simple? No, we're getting closer. It's alternate and simple. Is it alternate and compound? No, that's not it either. So then we'll look at the next section there. Number 5, is it alternate and simple? Yes, that is what we have. So now we'll have to start working through the list. Do any of these apply to our specimen? So again, we have simple leaf margin, I don't see any thorns. We have pinnate venation, not that that really asks, but you again look at the vein and look at how the side ones all come out from the midrib there, right in the center. They don't array from a central point. They all come out from that main the midrib. So we can run down this list. None of these apply to our specimen here. So we'll keep looking. Flip to the next page, which continues that section 5. I'm not going to read through all these, but I do want to point out that, let's say you don't know what an elm looks like. Why would you know what an elm looks like? You know, so that plate 34, birches. If you don't know what the birch family looks like, what the birch genus looks like, then you're not going to know what that means. So what you can do is just flip to it. And honestly, we're at the point here now. So this page starts plate 27, goes down to plate 46. That's not terrible to flip through. I don't think you should just kind of flip through it real quick and say, oh no, I don't see what we're looking for there. But you can flip through and look at the plate and say, is this plate addressing our question of what our, specimen is here? I keep almost saying it. So for example, we'll say here, so I'll just flip. Yeah, well, let's do birches, plate 34. So I'll go to plate 34 and say, I don't know, maybe that is a birch. I don't know if this is going to work. We'll try it out. So we can see here in our identification book, none of these look at all like what we have. They all look very similar to each other. So that makes sense that they're on the same plate, but that doesn't look like what we have. So then you would go, keep going, keep going, keep going. So for this one, you would actually work your way all the way down, because again, we don't have any lobes. We don't have any teeth there. We don't have any thorns. So you just keep working down, and eventually you would get all the way down to plate 44. And the accounts begin there on page 357. I hope you can follow that. So trees with leaves, neither toothed nor evergreen. That describes these very kind of plain leaves pretty aptly, I think. So let's check it out. Let's switch to plate 44. Okay, so here we are, plate 44. That looks like there are a couple options here that could be what we have. So now you know you're on the right track. Let's start to use our process of elimination now. It says here in this chart, the first column there, leaves mostly more than 6 inches long. Our leaves here are less than 6 inches long, and I'll just kind of give you that information because, again, we're pretending that you're looking at it. So we can go ahead and rule out pawpaw. Additionally, well, yeah, there's other traits too, but let's just say by leaf alone, we can rule out pawpaw. Okay, so just kind of quickly scanning, I see in a couple places things that are rare, so that's probably not going to be what we have, but also down there, Georgia only. So that's not where we are right now. Maybe some of you are in Georgia, but I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so we can rule that out. What else? Crepe myrtle. I think a lot of people know crepe myrtle from kind of landscape settings. That's what a crepe myrtle is. This is a big tree in the woods or on the edge of the woods. That's not a crepe myrtle. So we can go ahead and rule out crepe myrtle. So now we're working with a much smaller list. And we could go through a lot of these traits, but you oftentimes can't see some of these traits. So if you're looking at a big tree, what it wants you, let me see if I can go back. Yeah, so let's look at these categories again. So leaves, leaf tips, that's easy to see from a distance, but twigs hairy, you can't see that from a distance. Pith partitioned, pith is the inside tissue of stems, you can't see that from a distance for sure. Bundle scars, per leaf scar, things like that. There's a lot of details in here that you're not going to be able to see if you're standing on the ground and the leaves are pretty far from you. So let's look rather in the description and in the narrative and see if we can suss out any details there and start to continue to cross things off the list. So we'll look there on the right. Oh, great, I circled it. Page 358. So we'll go ahead and flip to page 358. And we'll see all of our species here. And let's just start reading descriptions. First thing I see, it's small flower pawpaw, which I had never heard of before making this presentation. Southeastern states. That's, again, not where we are, so we'll go ahead and cross that off the list. Okay, next, American smoke tree, one of the rarest American trees. Do we think that's in Lancaster, PA? I don't know. But also, there's the range map of it down there. It's not here, not even close. If it was in Western PA or in Maryland or in Virginia, you could potentially keep that as a possibility for something we'd see here, but that is clearly nowhere around here, especially since it's one of the rarest American trees. So we'll cross that off the list. Now let's go down. Alternate leaf dogwoods. Well, we see very quickly it's a small tree or shrub. And this specimen that we're looking at is, again, real big tree in the woods. So it's not what we have either. If you flip then to the next page, for more accounts, we don't even have to read the corkwood account. That's another one that is very, very uncommon. But you can see it's not even close to PA. So we can cross that off the list as well. And so now we only have two possibilities. We've worked through the guide. We've worked through your existing knowledge. You've worked through process of elimination. We have two possibilities left. Let's say that this picture here in the center is what the bark looks like. We can compare that. We have bark on either side. This is actually, I struggled with this because these two species have very similar bark, or can have pretty similar bark. So it's kind of hard to make a very clear diagnostic. This one is this one is that one. There are fine details, but we could just go by color alone. If you were to read the description, for persimmon, it has a very characteristically dark bark, super dark colored bark, dark brown. And then our sour gum is what they're calling it. Black gum is what most people call it around here anyway, has this more gray bark that is less kind of cobblestone looking than the persimmon, although it can get like that when it gets, the bigger it gets. These sort of vertical strips that we have here now in the bark kind of become dissected and become more and more like cobblestones, like a persimmon, but a persimmon is never going to get as big as a black gum needs to get those cobblestones. So we can now say, there he is. We have, this is Sylvatica, sour gum, or black gum. Okay, so this, the title of this talk was Any Time of Year, and we just ran through a bunch of leaf traits. And yeah, I talked about trying to look at the arrangement, when you don't have leaves. Again, this is something, learning it without leaves on is something that can be challenging. But again, just practice, keep practicing. If you're going to start with leaf focused identification, which, I don't know if I necessarily would recommend doing that actually, but if you were to start with just leaves, let's say you have one of these lying around, and so that's a good reason, just go ahead and start with this. Again, look at the bark, pay attention to the bark, focus really intently on the bark, and then when you're looking for more of that specimen, make sure you look at the bark always. Just try to study that bark, and not only at that size, but at all sizes, because bark, the reason it has texture in the first place is just kind of basic geometry. The inside of the tree is growing outwards. The area is growing faster than the circumference can. So we get cracks and fissures and shagginess and all sorts of different features to most of our species. As they grow wider, they get more intricate on the bark. So the bigger, a very big mature tree is going to have bark that's very different than a young tree. And if you look at the very top of the branches of most species, they are not going to have bark that looks like what's down on the ground. So it's really important, no matter how old that tree is, to learn, okay, not only is this black cherry bark, but this is a mature black cherry bark. A black cherry that's only 10 years old is not going to have bark that looks like this at all. So again, very important, not just to study all individuals that you see of that species, but to look at the bark and try to correlate that to the size of the tree as well. Okay, excuse me. And then, kind of flippantly there, I try to hammer this a lot. Got to learn the bark. You really got to learn the bark. If you want to know your trees, if you want to be good at tree ID, you got to learn the bark. And it's worth it because you'll never have to look up again. You'll never have to say, dang, I really wish I brought my binoculars. It is a more foolproof way to learn your tree identification. I already recommended this book here. I really can't recommend it enough. It's a really great way to start identifying trees by bark, whether it's winter or summer. And a nice thing about practicing with your bark when the leaves are still on is you kind of have a fail-safe. You can look up and say, okay, well, yeah, this is a red maple. There's the leaves right there. So it might be worth investing in and using, even when the leaves are on. But again, just like any other resource out there, I can't say it enough. Read the how-to section in the beginning, especially this book in particular. I'm sure there are other good bark books out there. This is my personal favorite, but this one's kind of laid out a little different. It's great, but it's not laid out the same way as this book or as a lot of other keys would be. So really important to read that front matter first. Okay, so now I don't know how much time we have, but I am happy to answer any and all questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was a wealth of knowledge you just shared with all of us. I don't know. I honestly feel like I sort of do want to get, what is it, mad? I got it tattooed on me just so I can't remember the last part of it. Trees and shrubs. So thank you so much for sharing that. We will take an extra few minutes here just to get some of these questions in. I know we're going to run over a little bit, but just remember that we will be recording this session. So if you do need to leave at the top of the hour, we will be sending out a link to the recording next week, and we will make sure that we get that out to you, as well as some of the resources that Ryan mentioned, like his YouTube channel and the different books. We'll make sure that that goes out in the email as well, so you have that, so you can go and get the book and start identifying trees as well. So if you want to take the next couple seconds here just to start popping your questions in the Q&A box. While you do that, I just want to remind you of our upcoming Nature Hour with Kate Gonick from Lancaster Conservancy, our very own. She'll be talking about saving history through land protection and talking about some of the really interesting historic things that have happened on our preserves and that are preserved there forever thanks to their land protection efforts. So let's jump right into some Q&A. We have a question from Tony. Are there any other books you might identify for tree identification beyond those two favorites that you have, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm tempted to go up to my bookshelf and grab a bunch. There are a ton. There are a ton. I think one of the ones that, this is nice, but how many species were in that little, tutorial that don't apply here at all, that are all southern species? There's a little book called Trees of Pennsylvania that you can get, and it's, it actually is pocket size. You could fit that in the back pocket of most jeans, maybe if you, not super fashionable women's jeans. For some reason, they won't give you pockets, but if you have decent pockets, you can fit in there. And so that is a smaller range of trees. I'm not sure if that's laid out in a key though, but it could be a really nice companion to keep in your back pocket. And I also like the Sibley guide, but that's mostly just because I really like the Sibley, how he, illustrates things. That one's also not really much of a key. But is, again, a nice resource to kind of pair with the other things you have around. The downside of the Sibley is it's huge. It's more of like a coffee table kind of thing than a field book.
Understood, but probably beautiful. We have a question from Ned. Are we at peak canopy now with fewer trees in the US in the future due to disease and climate change?
I hope not, Ned. I hope not. But yeah, well, you know what? I'm going to be optimistic and say that maybe we're in a trough right now, because I think specifically with climate change, specifically with water quality, we're starting to understand as a society the importance of forest cover. I don't think we're even remotely close to what we need to be, but I think that within the next couple decades, it is going to be a given that reforestation is going to be a huge part of everyday life, and just reincorporating trees and forest cover into our daily lives. I kind of have my personal catchphrase is that the future is forested. That's about half of the version. There's an expletive in so the full version is the future is forested, or blank, and you can fill in that blank however you like. We're in trouble if we don't. And specifically with climate change, it's only going to exacerbate everything, and we need to expand our forest cover. But so I hope we're not at the peak right now. It's quite possible, knowing how humans do their thing. You can kind of trace the rise and fall of every major, civilization to how much forest cover did they have. Going back to the Fertile Crescent, it was the Fertile Crescent because it was based on forest soils, and then when all those forest soils were depleted, it's now Iraq and Iran, and then you go to Greece and the same thing, and then Rome, and then so on and so forth. And here we are with this wealth, but we're not really treating it well. So hopefully we can learn from history, but we all know how that goes. So fingers crossed on that. Good question.
My fingers are crossed too, and hopefully we're preaching to the choir here. This is hopefully a group of concerned people who are out volunteering and supporting organizations like the Alliance, who are out planting trees, and our other partner organizations doing the same thing in this region. We have a question from Deborah. Since Google is very iffy, would you consider iNaturalist, or are there any other apps or kind of electronic resources you might use to identify trees?
Yeah, iNaturalist would be the one that I would recommend using. There's another one that I really like that's more, the reason why I downloaded it is to help a little bit more with wildflowers with herbaceous species, because, 400 trees, but like there's, thousands of potential herbaceous species. But most of our woody species are flower. Everything does in some way, shape, or form. But all of our flowering plants anyway are non-conifers. But that flower guide actually has a lot of woody species in it as well. So that could be really helpful if it's in bloom. But yeah, iNaturalist is a good option. And it's nice that it's kind of crowdsourced. That's, I think, a cool component of it.
We have a question also from Deborah about identifying saplings or volunteers when they're very young, when you don't really have the leaves due to the winter. Any recommendations on kind of how to go about that? Yeah,
so many species look very different when they're seedlings compared to when they're even saplings. That first couple years of growth, when they first sprout, they can look really, really different. And I'm guessing this question is because, you have your garden and there's all these little things in it, and you don't want to pull something if it would be beneficial for you to leave. But yeah, I would recommend, I have now gotten to know, our silver maple versus red maple versus sycamore versus box elder versus whatever else is springing up, our little woody trees. So I would recommend letting a couple get a little bit bigger to the point where you can identify them feasibly. And then, remember what they looked like when they were shrimpy, or maybe, take pictures and so that you can kind of compare that to new things that are popping up.
We have a question about this kind of the habitat for some trees. Tulip poplars were mentioned at the beginning as one of those favorite, really easy to identify trees. Are those good trees to be planted along the Conestoga River or any riparian area? And, if not, are there other suggestions that you have?
Yeah. Tulip poplar, I plant tons of tulip poplar in riparian settings. They're what we would call a mesic species. So they're not wet loving, they're not dry loving, they're kind of in the middle is their ideal situation, but they will grow really well in wet-ish soil, really well in dry-ish soil. I wouldn't plant them somewhere that gets like standing water periodically, but if it's, kind of wet, sometimes, then tulip poplars will grow there. And I've seen them growing, right onto the banks of streams before. So I'd say give it a shot. And they are very, very fast growers. So that's a nice benefit of them too.
We have a question about where is that line between a young tree and a mature tree? Is it super obvious to draw that line? I know you mentioned that when you're looking at your identification, you want to kind of know whether it's mature or young.
No, there is no line. It's so hard and too complicating it is trees are different. Humans, you can roughly tell, we follow a pattern of growth no matter what, but trees it's more based on the site conditions. If it's really poor soils, there can be a tree that's hundreds of years old that looks like it's, 30 or 40. So it can be really hard to tell that line. But you'll start to see some features. So like a sapling is going to look, very different than kind of a middle-aged tree, which is going to look very different than a really large tree. And there's not really a sharp line. It's not like suddenly we reach, 12 inches in diameter. So we're going to, put the flakes on our bark. But it'll kind of slowly happen over time. And that'll be another really fun way of kind of getting to know these species is kind of starting to see that transition.
Great. And we'll take time for just 2 more questions here. I know there's so many questions, and we'll make sure that Ryan's information is, linked to the website and everything, so you can get in touch if there's additional conversations that you want to have. We send out that email next week. We have a question from Elizabeth. Trees are moving slowly, but do you see signs of trees from like more southern locations right now starting to move north due to climate change, and adversely are trees moving north?
I would say it's less of moving, and this is not a fun answer, but more of trees dying that are more that are in the south that are kind of now not as viable there anymore. Things just trees take a long time to live and a long time to die, but the kind of cocktail of factors with climate change influencing a lot of them will start to just cause them to die. It seems really pronounced in oaks right now. A lot of oak species are, especially if they're kind of out in the open, if there's an oak that was kind of a shade tree, they're just dying, which is pretty crazy. And so the thing that scares me the most with climate change and the migration of species is that assumes that we're going to let them migrate. We do not have a connected landscape right now. I mean, do you think, squirrels are planting acorns by the bushelful, into every farmer's field, but they're not going to just let those oaks come up and then slowly march, northward over the field. So it does make me nervous, and I know I'm not really answering the question at all. But I guess, suffice to say, I don't really see more southerly species starting to grow here naturally. I do see species that are more northerly not doing well here. And again, that's due to a whole cocktail of factors, but we can think about our hemlocks and the woolly adelgid. In the south, they're toast. The hemlocks are pretty much gone. But here in PA, and we're kind of starting to see they're really not dying as heavily as we thought they would, because we're a little bit more north, and the further in elevation you go, the better it gets. So yeah, I don't know if I really answered that question at all, but I talked about it for a while.
Well, at least it's some good news with the hemlocks a little bit there at the end. One final question from Ned. When you see lichen growing on the trunk of a tree, is this an indicator that the tree is in poor health?
No, not at all. Just that it's a little older.
That's great. And the lichen, especially right now after the rain we had the last few days, I'm sure is extra bright. Well, with that, it was a nice short answer. We'll get one more question in here. With forest management, is it best to let things grow naturally or to manage the growth of the trees?
Oh, such a good question. So it depends on what your objectives are. If you don't really care about the health of the forest or wildlife, you kind of just want somewhere that's in the woods that's private to go to, then doing nothing is a fine thing to do. But if you do want that forest to be healthy and you want that forest to be a forest for as long as possible, then management is an incredibly important part of that. And also for wildlife. In general, we had the big cut. Most of Pennsylvania was cleared in the kind of early 1900s, and a large part that's just kind of grown up now. What hasn't been converted into some other land use is all pretty much the same age. It's all kind of 80-ish years old. Most Pennsylvanians are not doing active forest management, and our wildlife are crashing for that reason. So I think a lot of people know about the ruffed grouse declining. That is a specialist of young forest habitat. When we don't cut any trees down at all, even if we think we're doing the right thing, even if we're trying to do the right thing, we're essentially reducing habitat of a lot of species that need that young forest. And so kind of that could be a whole other presentation, and rather a whole, major of forestry in college. Yes. But the keys to responsible forest management is assessing what you have in the overstory, but then more importantly, almost assessing what you have in the understory. And we want to make sure before you're removing any trees, or oftentimes the reason you're removing trees is so that you can inspire what's in the understory, little tiny seedlings and saplings to become the next generation of forest. But if we don't do that, if we leave things really heavily shaded, we're not going to have any regeneration. And if something happens, like say a pest wipes through, it's going to be a disaster because there's going to be nothing kind of waiting in the wings except invasive plants, which are going to move in. And that I would say too, no matter where you are, even if you don't care about anything, but just kind of being in the woods, managing your invasives is still going to make it a more pleasant experience. A lot of invasive shrubs have been found to correlate very highly with Lyme disease occurrence in ticks. So everyone should be managing invasives on their land as much as they can.
Fantastic. Well, Ryan, I just want to thank you again so much for this incredible presentation tonight. You've really walked us through how we can really actually just focus on the details while we're out hiking this fall, this winter, this spring, and each season. You know, your work with the Alliance is so incredible to hopefully turning the tide on some of the more depressing questions that we got asked here tonight. And I want to remind everyone that we will be emailing out these great resources that Ryan has shared, as well as a recording of the evening. And we hope you will be able to join us for our final nature hour of 2020 with Kate Gonick. And you can sign up for that at lancasterconservancy.org/events. And just thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight and learn a little bit more. We truly appreciate it. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday evening. Thank you.